with a GDP of 18.10%, Nigeria's telecommunications sector recorded double-digit growth in the second quarter of the year. That's amid global and domestic economic headwinds arising from the twin effect of the COVID-19 outbreak as well as the falling crude oil prices. Joining me for a focus on the space is Olusola Teniola. Olusola is the president of the Association of Telecommunications Companies of Nigeria, also known as ATCON. Olusola, always a pleasure to have you in conversations on CNBC Africa.
Good afternoon to you.
So clearly, the numbers that we see by far validate reports that the telcos did make a killing off the back of the COVID-19 realities. I just want to get a sense of your thoughts on the drivers of the numbers that we see now.
Thank you for that question. I don't know about a killing, but we had predicted pre-COVID-19 that our performance will be positive going into Q2 after some positive numbers coming out of Q1. What we are looking towards is whether this is sustainable in Q3 and Q4. So really the drivers behind the sharp surge was really the sharp surge in data usage. That obviously coupled with the fact that we had a lockdown directive by the government and obviously interstate lockdowns, there was no movement. So a lot of the data traffic that we've witnessed has been from the home. There's been a lot of usage of different tools, collaborative tools to actually continue businesses, schooling, and obviously e-commerce. There's been an uprise in deliveries to homes and the usage of payment systems. While people have been locked down in their homes, they've also had to deal with entertainment. So Netflix obviously is one beneficiary of this, and obviously other social media platforms.
Teniola, it is quite understandable that a subscriber base would go up as well as penetration off the back of sit-at-home instructions and data consumption. But I'd like you to help us understand, based on what you said earlier, that the sector already had projected pre-COVID-19 that the numbers would go up. Give us a sense of what were the key drivers at the time before the realities of COVID-19 began to set in.
Yeah, what we had seen, there had been some deployments of 4G networks prior to COVID-19 pandemic really taking its hold in the country. We had one or two operators that had expanded on their 4G deployments and were offering tariffs that would ensure that there was a migration from those that are currently using 3G to 4G with new SIM cards. So we've seen those come on board. Currently, 4G penetration stands at about 40% of the population, which tallies with obviously the 40.85% of the Nigerian broadband penetration at the moment. So we are really sort of in line with 4G rollouts, and there will continue to be the case. What we saw is that obviously there was somewhat of a slowdown in terms of 4G rollouts during the pandemic, definitely in Q2, because obviously there was restricted movements, even though we had rights of passage assistance by government. That was just to maintain the networks. Definitely in Q2, people were using what they could use, and the subscription numbers increases really based on multi-SIM card usage and those trying to ensure that they can actually have more than one device connected to another service provider, so they could get onto data services to ensure that if you're working from home, you had a device that worked, and if you had children at home, they probably had different devices as opposed to sharing one device amongst the whole household. So data is the key. Wi-Fi deployments isn't really widely available in the country, so we're heavily reliant on the cellular networks and ISP networks. So that's one good reason why the subscriptions have increased, is basically the purchase of multiple SIMs.
So let's go back to first, we've touched on the realities of COVID-19 pandemic for the telco sector, and now you've brought us up to speed with to what extent the roles played by operators within the sector played in the figures. I want us to backtrack now and just have a look at what role specifically did the regulatory environment play in birthing the figures that we see from the contributions of the telco space to Nigeria's GDP?
Yes, that's a good question. I think that the regulator itself was very aware that they needed to ensure that we, as the players, could actually share infrastructure. So that was one of the directives that they had placed upon the industry to ensure that infrastructure was shared. So that's both active and passive infrastructure. And to also assist, as I said, on the rights of passage. That was one of the areas that they intervened, and also to ensure that the networks were up. As you know, that the networks have been under tremendous pressure. There's been a lot more increase in data usage, and the pattern of usage has definitely changed for a difference. I mean, you see one of our members, their annual report suggested that there was a 25% increase in data usage, and I think that's been collective across the industry. We've seen that networks have been under tremendous pressure. Obviously, we've been battling to ensure that we are able to access some form of forex to ensure that we can import further equipment to alleviate the congestion. But the reality is that a lot of people will not be going back to work, so they'll be working from home. The only thing that might be a negative is the propensity to continue to spend on data if you've lost your job. So the consumer pressure on the ability to continually purchase data is something that we have to watch out for in Q3 and Q4, which might obviously taper the numbers and probably flatten the R curve, as we call it, in terms of the growth that we've seen in Q2.
Okay, so Olusola, if I get you right now, and you feel free to correct me, you're saying to us essentially, don't put all our gains on COVID-19. We worked for this, we prepared for this, we projected impressive numbers already ahead of the COVID-19 pandemic. But then there are talks about some of the gains that you see, that we are seeing in the telco space, also due to the gradual reopening of the Nigerian economy. Now, I just want to get a sense of, first, your thoughts on that, and then your outlook for the telco space in the next quarter, even as Nigeria is waiting for what it's said to be unimpressive Q3 GDP figures.
Yes, I like that one. I think that as long as we have children or those that are still in secondary school having to still go to school using Zoom tools, and you mentioned Zoom because it's one of the most popular devices that's seen an astronomical increase over this COVID-19 period, or any other collaborative tool, then the data in terms of their usage will always increase, because obviously people still need to get an education. I feel that with the lockdown easing, they will return to the office. And our office base, which is under the enterprise segment, is a significant proportion of our revenue. And I believe that there will be further rollouts of facilities to support that. And remember, we still have a Nigerian broadband plan that we need to implement. So there's definitely activity that will only increase in ensuring the implementation of that Nigerian broadband plan of 2020-2025 to ensure that there's a continuous growth. So my forecast is that, yes, we should be a bit cautious. I would say it will be flat going forward, but to be positive.